All right, so tariffs are back in the news,
Yeah.
and we are diving right into this honestly pretty wild world of trade and tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're tackling, well, former President Trump's pronouncements on tariffs. He's back to calling them beautiful tariffs, but
Right.
are they really? I mean, that's what we're here to dig into. You sent us this fascinating Washington Post article about his proposals, and
Yeah.
it is, let me tell you, it's a doozy.
Yeah, it really highlights how different his approach is from really anything that's considered conventional. This isn't just a continuation of his previous policies. We're talking universal tariffs,
Okay.
a potential hike on China tariffs, and rates that could go to 100%, maybe even 1,000%.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Did they misspeak? Is that a typo? Somebody
Yeah.
fact check that for me.
Got a
Because,
big number.
wow,
Yeah.
that sounds like uncharted territory.
Yeah.
So what's the thinking here? I mean, the article, it mentioned this whole most beautiful word angle. Like tariffs are the magic solution for U.S. manufacturing, bringing back jobs.
Yeah. All that good stuff.
That's the core argument that you hear from proponents of these sorts of policies. They say, by making imports more expensive, you're going to incentivize companies to produce domestically. And that should lead to more manufacturing jobs here in the U.S. And to be fair,
Right.
there is a certain logic to that. The Coalition for a Prosperous America, for example,
Yeah.
they project that a 10% universal tariff could create 3 million new jobs
Wow.
and significantly increase U.S. manufacturing output.
3 million jobs.
Yeah.
That's a big number. It's no wonder then
Yeah.
that a good chunk of voters out there would find this idea appealing.
Sure.
The article even mentioned a Reuters Ipsos poll showing that there's substantial support for these tariffs,
Mhm.
particularly among Republicans and independents.
Yeah. And it really taps into, I think, a couple of different things. One is this idea, this desire for economic security. And then also kind of a nostalgia, a return to a time when U.S. manufacturing was more dominant than it is now.
There's always a but.
Always a but. And in this case, the but is that those beautiful tariffs,
Mm.
they might end up hitting us, the everyday consumer,
Mm,
right where it hurts our wallets.
precisely. I mean, the tariffs might sound good to some people in theory, but the reality is they often lead to higher prices for consumers.
Right.
We're talking about your groceries, fruits, vegetables, that morning cup of coffee.
So no more $5 lattes.
Right. It gets pricier.
Okay, now that's a tough pill to swallow, I gotta say.
And it's not just the small things. The article highlights this potential gas price increase could be as high as 75 cents per gallon in the Midwest.
Wow.
Imagine what that does to families who rely on their cars for their everyday lives.
Yeah, I mean, gas is already
Yeah.
not cheap.
Yeah, that adds up.
And they even threw out some numbers about how much this could cost the average household.
Oh.
Something like an extra $2,600 to $7,600 a year.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind, those are just averages.
Right.
Lower income Americans, they already spend a larger proportion of their income on just necessities, and they would be disproportionately affected by this. Imagine a family struggling to put food on the table. Their grocery bill jumps by even 10%.
It's a sobering thought, for sure.
Mm.
So we've talked about potential benefits, we've talked about drawbacks, but the article also hinted at something called market volatility. And I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting, am I right?
Yeah, the thing about markets is they really thrive on stability. They
Right.
like predictability. So these sudden, drastic changes, things like these proposed tariffs, they tend to make investors nervous. And that nervousness, that often translates into market volatility.
So like a roller coaster for anyone who's got investments.
Yeah, kind of.
Not exactly a thrill ride that I think most people are signing up for.
Not at all, no. And the article even cited a UBS projection that a 10% universal tariff, combined with that potential 60% hike on China, that could send the S&P 500 index tumbling down over 10%.
10%. Yikes.
Ugh.
And that's just one index.
Yeah.
What are the global impact here? This can't be good news for the global economy, can it?
Well, it's like this, right? Imagine if U.S. stock markets take a hit. It's going to have a ripple effect. Other global markets are going to react, and that could lead to a worldwide downturn.
So even if the goal is to boost U.S. businesses, this could backfire spectacularly and end up hurting everyone, including the very companies that they're claiming to try to help.
Yeah, you're talking about this really tricky issue of unintended consequences. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Take U.S. auto manufacturers, for instance. On the surface, tariffs on imported cars might seem like a win for them. more people buying American-made cars, right?
Right, yeah, seems like a pretty logical assumption.
Sure.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, a lot of car parts,
Yeah.
they're sourced globally. So a tariff on imported steel, for example, that would increase the cost of production for U.S. automakers, even if they're assembling the cars here in the U.S.
It's kind of a double-edged sword then.
Exactly, yeah.
So what started as maybe an attempt to help certain industries could actually end up hurting them in the long run. Ouch.
Yeah, talk about unintended consequences.
For sure.
And then there's the even bigger issue, the potential for a global trade war. The article suggests that other countries,
Oh, here we go.
they're gearing up for a fight.
A trade war, like with actual tariffs going back and forth.
Yeah, like with real tariffs. And we're
Yeah.
not just talking about, strongly worded letters or anything. Remember during Trump's first term when the U.S. put tariffs on steel and aluminum imports?
Yeah.
The EU retaliated with tariffs on a whole bunch of U.S. goods, from Harley-Davidson motorcycles
Aha.
to Kentucky bourbon.
Didn't China get involved too?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They put tariffs on key agricultural exports, soybeans in particular. That really hurt American farmers, especially in the Midwest.
Yeah, and then there were those massive farm bailouts,
Exactly.
which, those were not insignificant. So this time around, other countries, knowing how this went down before, they're ready to hit back even harder.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus, yeah.
Okay.
The article suggests they're even more prepared now. And they could target some really important American products, like Boeing airplanes, or even try to disrupt crucial supply chains.
Okay, so not just tariffs on bourbon this time. We're talking potentially major disruptions to global trade. That sounds messy, to say the least. There's one thing I'm not quite getting, though. What does a stronger dollar have to do with any of this? The article mentioned that as a potential consequence, but I'm blanking on why that matters.
That's a great question, and it all comes down to how currencies work and how they impact trade. A stronger dollar basically means that U.S. goods become more expensive for other countries to buy. It's like going on vacation and you realize your dollars don't go as far as you thought they would.
So if our products are more expensive because the dollar is stronger, that hurts our exports because other countries can just go find cheaper options somewhere else.
Exactly, you got it.
Okay.
And that can have a domino effect on U.S. companies that rely on those export markets.
Makes sense. It's starting to feel a bit like a house of cards here, honestly. Like one wrong move and the whole thing could just come crashing down.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. And then on top of all of that, there's this other term that the article mentioned, stagflation.
Stagflation. It sounds like some kind of mythical economic beast.
It kind of is, and not one you want to encounter. Imagine this. Your paycheck stays the same, but the cost of everything around you keeps going up. Groceries, gas,
Wow.
rent.
Yep.
It's all increasing, but your income isn't keeping up. That's stagflation, this terrible combination of stagnant economic growth and high inflation.
So not only are we talking about potential job losses and market crashes, but we might also end up in a situation where everything is insanely expensive and nobody can afford anything.
Right, and here's the thing. Some economists believe that these policies that are designed to protect domestic industries, like tariffs, they could actually make stagflation worse.
Wow, okay, so
Yeah, it's a really complex issue.
we're potentially facing higher prices, market instability, a global trade war, and this stagflation beast lurking in the shadows. Is there any good news here? Is there any light at the end of this, kind of dark and twisty tunnel?
Well, there are some experts who believe that this whole thing with tariffs could be a strategic move by Trump. A high-stakes gamble, you could say, to gain some leverage in trade negotiations.
So not so much about actually going through with these tariffs, but more about using them as a bargaining chip to get better trade deals.
Yeah, exactly. Like playing poker. You raise the stakes with a bluff to try to force the other players to fold or to negotiate a better hand.
Risky, but I can see how it might work.
Hmm.
But that would mean that other countries are actually willing to play along. What if they call the bluff?
That's the big question, right? And it gets at this really fundamental issue of whether the current global trade system, with all of its flaws and inequities, is actually sustainable.
Feels like we're at a crossroad.
We are. Do we retreat into ourselves, build walls, and view trade as this zero-sum game? Or do we figure out a way to work together to create a system that's more equitable, more sustainable, and ultimately benefits everyone? These are really big questions.
Yeah.
And the answers go way beyond just tariffs and trade balances.
It's a lot to consider, that's for sure. Potential economic benefits, but also some huge risks. Higher prices, market instability, a possible trade war, and then, this whole stagflation thing looming out there. It feels like the stakes are really high here.
Yeah, no question. And it's not just about what happens here in the US, right? The global economy is so interconnected these days. Any major policy shift here, it's going to send ripples across the world. It's like that game, what is it, Jenga?
Oh,
You
yeah,
pull out the wrong block and the whole thing collapses.
exactly. So where do we go from here? Is there
Mm.
any way to navigate this really complex landscape without, causing a global meltdown?
That's the million-dollar question. And I don't think there are any easy answers here, no magic solutions.
Mm.
It's about carefully weighing those potential benefits against the very real risks and recognizing that any action, especially something as big as these proposed tariffs, it's going to have big consequences.
It really highlights how we live in a complicated world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where seemingly straightforward solutions can have these really complex outcomes.
Absolutely. And it just underscores how important it is to have these informed debates, to really think critically about these issues. We need to move past those sound bites and slogans and actually have real discussions about the trade-offs. What are we willing to accept as a society? What are we not willing to accept?
So it's bigger than just tariffs then,
It's
isn't it?
bigger.
It's about having these conversations about globalization, about economic fairness, and really about our vision for the future.
Exactly. And those conversations, they need to be happening everywhere, around kitchen tables, in the halls of government, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Because at the end of the day, it's about deciding what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of legacy we want to leave for future generations.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a lot to think about. Maybe even spark some conversations of your own. Remember, staying informed is so important. It's the first step towards creating a more just and prosperous future for all of us.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, it's not just about understanding how complicated the world is. It's also about feeling empowered to actually shape it. Your voice matters, your choices matter. So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Love it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those great questions coming.